Okay, so I don't really know how to do an intro, so I'm just gonna start this documentary or whatever the hell you want to call it, and it's going to be about vampires, whether it's legends, truth, or theory. Now, I'm gonna start with the stigmas. Usually, people who know about vampires or vampire legends usually know about the medieval stigma, which is the stones inside the skeleton's mouths, which usually was because people were afraid, thinking that people who had mental disorders or people who actually had a disease that made them look different than the average person had them immediately thought that this was something evil or demonic. And they would stick these stones inside the mouths of the skeleton, hoping that it will stop the vampire from rising from the dead. For instance, when people would die of the Black Plague, the people that believed that these people were probably vampires and were going to resurrect, they would dig up the bodies and they'll find it filled with blood. The process of rigor mortis is happens after death, and basically it's a process the body goes through before it completely rots and maggots take over and all that nonsense. But the bodies will fill with blood, and within a day, I believe this happens, and it has to do with the blood vessels. So I'm not going to go deep into the whole process, but basically the body will fill with blood and it will look swollen. And sometimes blood will leak out the mouth and the nose, and people will mistake this or confuse this as someone who's been walking around all night drinking people's blood around the village or town where they were from. So those are the main stigmas. There was a lot of superstition in medieval times, and science wasn't as advanced as it is now, and people would automatically assume that someone who, let's say, had schizophrenia, for example, heard voices and was violent, they probably thought this person was a werewolf, um, because they probably roamed around at night and heard things that the normal person couldn't hear, and also was very aggressive and violent, and they automatically thought that this person was either a vampire or a werewolf because they were superstitious and their number one belief was in religion. Now, these are the common stigmas. The only evidence they have of vampires scientifically are these skeletons with their jaws jammed in with stones. They don't have any skeletons with fangs or anything like that because most of the teeth were either deteriorated or they were broken when these stones were jammed into the mouths of these people. Now, I'm going to talk about things that I believe are theories. Vampires are known, if you look this up yourself, there's many credible sites, history books that have to do with folklore. Every country that you can think of has some sort of folklore related to vampires. Now that is completely, it's mind-boggling. It's interesting because how is it that the entire world, different cultures, different people, different sites, all had a similar belief of what a vampire was, or that this exact being existed? And now many people don't know this, but they say vampires was originated by Vlad the Impaler, which is why they created the story of Dracula, based on this historic man who supposedly was ruthless and he liked to impale the heads of his enemies. Now, that's where they stole the Dracula story from. But the truth is, vampire legends have been around since Mesopotamian times. And that goes back in BC years. But not many people actually talk about this. For you to know about this, you would have to actually do some thorough research. So that's what I find interesting. Now, the fact that these vampires originate in Mesopotamia is not what intrigues me the most. even the fact that these legends date back to Babylonian times, Jewish culture, Sumerian even. And as many of you know, Mesopotamia is one of the first civilizations that we know of on Earth. Now, what intrigues me the most is the case of Count Saint Germain and two cases in New Orleans from the early 1900s. First, let's start off with Count Saint Germain. So, it was this wealthy individual in 1700s France. Now, this guy was filthy rich, and no one knew why or how he accumulated his wealth. No one knew where his family was from or where he came from. There was no trace of his history. But he was acquainted with kings and queens and royals because he had money. And he would feast with kings and queens and anyone who was in the royal court in France in the 1700s. And what's strange is people who knew this guy said that he never ate and he only sipped on his wine. Now, this guy knew 6 different languages. And for someone to know 6 different languages at that time is pretty impressive. On top of that, he was an alchemist. And I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with alchemy, but it's kind of something related to magic. In a sense, metals, magic and metals. You would have to look into it. I'm not going to do a whole entire documentary on alchemy. But it's not something that anyone could do. And it takes a lot of practice and years of dedication. But anyways, besides alchemy, this guy was also a classical composer. And he was known to be someone who was very articulate and knew how to speak well-rounded, as if he lived for hundreds of years before anyone at court. So they spoke really highly of this guy. And the next strange thing that happened, besides not knowing where this guy comes from, this smart, intelligent, articulate guy who knows alchemy in 6 different languages, supposedly after his death, which they never had a body, he just disappeared. People assumed that he died eventually. About over 100 years later, I believe, or it was over 80 years later, someone related to the royals who dined with this guy, Count Saint Germain, said they saw him. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 witnesses. It was many witnesses that lived in this area and who were related to these royals who dined with Count Saint Germain and knew Count Saint Germain, saw him alive, which is impossible. And they started to believe this guy was immortal. Now, it gets even weirder than that. So, over a century later, in New Orleans, waltzes in this French, obviously French, because his first name is Jacques. Jacques as in Jacques, Jacques Saint Germain, waltzes in to New Orleans in the early 1900s. I believe it's 1930. No one knows where he comes from. No one knows his history. No one knows what his family's from or anything. Same deal as Count Saint Germain. And on top of that, this guy was wealthy as well and wore a lot of jewels on his outfits. And on top of that, he used to like throwing feasts, just like the other guy from the 1700s. And he would invite everyone from the French Quarter, of course, wealthy people. And they would dine with him and they'll drink with him. But no one knew where this guy came from or how he had his wealth. And back then, it was difficult to not know where someone comes from by their last name. It was easy to find out someone's history and what family this guy came from. If this guy came from London and if his family is wealthy in London and what were their names. It was easy to know everyone back then and to be able to identify how this person came of wealth. Now, so this new guy named Jacques Saint Germain, just like Count Saint Germain, is just automatically appears in New Orleans, and like I said, he's feasting, he's enjoying himself. One night, a girl escapes from his house. He owned a luxurious house on the French Quarter that had a balcony. The girl escapes from his balcony and claims that he had bit her neck. Now, the police go into this investigation and they try to arrest Count Saint Germain, but by the time they got to his house, he was gone. Now, this guy was never seen again. So that's mind-boggling as well. And it makes absolutely no sense, no scientific sense for that matter. Now, the last case I'm going to talk about is the two brothers from New Orleans. And these two brothers, they lived in an apartment on their own. And no one knew where they came from at all either. Eventually, they did find out who their family was. But at first, they didn't know who they were. And they used to invite a lot of people over to their apartment. And one girl escaped from their apartment. And her wrists were cut and she was running down the street. Now, she didn't die because the way that they cut her wrist was specifically so that her blood drained within days slowly. So they knew what they were doing. They knew how to exactly cut someone in such a risky area so that they don't bleed out right away and die. Now, when the police went back to the apartment, there were 14 bodies found, drained of blood, and 2 found sitting in a chair tied up. And they also found wine bottles in the refrigerator filled with blood. Now, these guys were caught and they were executed. And their bodies were buried in the New Orleans cemetery. Now, within the years when they found out where these 2 guys came from, they buried the family in the same exact vault as the 2 brothers. When they buried them, within years, they would keep burying family members, and one year, they opened the vault, and the 2 bodies of the brothers were gone. People say that they saw the exact description of these 2 guys years later. I don't know. That's something that you can never know if it's fact or false, because a witness is a witness. They can either lie or they can either tell the truth. The point is, these police records, documented cases, make absolute no sense. Now, I also forgot to mention that when these 2 brothers tried to escape the police, they jumped off a 3rd-story building and took off. Now, for a human to do that, to jump off 3rd-story building, you would probably break your ankles or probably drop dead. Who knows? The point is, it's not something you could just jump off a 3rd-story building, land on your feet, and just take off like it's, like you're Superman or something. But, those 2 cases are the ones that are the strangest to me, aside from the fact that these legends date back to all the way to the first civilization of time. Now, I'm not saying these cases were true. I actually tried myself to investigate and find out New Orleans police records, crime records, of victims or of Count Saint Germain, Jack Saint Germain, or even of these cases, of these crimes that happened in 1930 and early 1900s. Now, they don't let me access these records online. I've tried. But I am going to New Orleans this October, and I'm going to investigate myself to see if these records are 100% true. According to the sites that I went on, usually when you go on a site, if it's only on that site, then it's very difficult to believe that it's true. Now, if you find it on more than one and two sites, perhaps there's a possibility that some of it is true. Now, I always look for credibility. Who's the author? Who wrote the article? Where does this site come from? Is it government related? Is it sponsored by an organization that is credible, etc.? Now, most of these sites where I got these stories from are not 100% credible. I mean, that doesn't mean that it's not true. But the reason why I am doing this documentary or podcast, whatever you want to call it, is because I have been researching the vampire legend on my own. I feel that there's a lot of things that have not come to light. For instance, these cases, you only find perhaps 3 sites about them. Also the fact that the vampire legend, so many people believe that this legend just started about 500 years ago, when in reality this legend has been here for thousands of years. And there's, just like anything, not just vampires, but any topic should have light on all its facts. And the vampire legend topic has been construed so many different ways. There's one thing I hate the most is researchers or sites, people who call vampires. To me, a vampire is the type of vampire you see in a film or a TV show. Not in every film and TV show, because some of them are ridiculous. Like the whole glittery thing on freaking Twilight. Like that's completely freaking ridiculous. But what I'm saying is the fact that they have supernatural abilities. They're not human, and they're not something that just walks around and likes the taste of blood. To me, that's not a vampire. That's either a sicko or someone who's a sanguinarian. Someone who enjoys to do that. There's also a disease of people who have an issue with their blood, who need to drink blood. That's a whole different topic. But when I think of vampire, I think of someone who has supernatural abilities, aside from the fact that they feed from humans to survive, or that they feed from humans' spirituality or strength. For instance, they drain psychic vampires, which they drain people physically to the point where they make them ill or weak. Those are the only 2 types of vampires. And I'm not saying I believe vampires that fly. I don't believe in vampires that fly. I think that's ridiculous as well. But I do believe that if, and that's a huge if, vampires do exist, they're never going to show themselves, for one. Which is why, if they do exist, it would be almost impossible to find hardcore evidence. And 2, I believe they must have some type of supernatural ability. Either that's with sight, hearing, speed, something. Because to me, a real original vampire, something that I believe, if it does exist, to me the definition would be someone who is a superhuman. And I'm not saying that throws lasers, etc. Nothing exaggerated, but something that is more advanced than the human body. I hate when they call vampires people who are in these little cults, and they put, they go to the dentist or to someone who's an expert at filing teeth. They go and file their fangs, or they get fangs, and then they call themselves, and they dress like a vampire, and they go out at night, and they practice all these blood rituals. You're not a freaking vampire, okay? That's not a vampire. That's someone who has mental issues, or someone who enjoys to have that lifestyle. And I'm not saying people who like that lifestyle have mental issues. Not at all. Because I actually love the way the Gothic Victorian outfits look on people who carry on that lifestyle. What I'm saying is, some people have mental issues. For instance, the cases of, which these are real documented cases. Like, you can actually look this up. This is a real documented case a young boy who, he's probably a teenager, he was like his 17 or 18, attacks a woman on, I think it was her second floor of her house. I believe this was in Florida, and bites her to drink her blood. Now, this kid's not a vampire. He's just someone who has mental issues and attacks random people. That's what I meant by people who, put on fangs or enjoy that lifestyle. Some have mental issues, some don't. Not saying that that lifestyle, means that you have a mental issue. Not at all, because I don't judge anyone. Now, like I said, I just hate when people refer to a vampire as some crazy person who randomly attacks someone, or as someone who enjoys having a vampire lifestyle but isn't a superhuman or doesn't have abilities that you could say are inhuman. That's not a vampire. Now, I myself am going to carry on this investigation. There was also another case which I'd like to speak of, and this one is actually more credible than the others that I've listed. The Count Saint Germain one is actually something that is more credible than the two brothers in New Orleans, because it's actually about a guy who really did exist, Count Saint Germain. Now, the fact that he's a vampire, those are theories due to the whole immortality belief that they had about this man, and the supposed re-encounter of him, or reappearance of this guy in New Orleans centuries later. Now, I want to talk about this case. There was a reporter, I can't remember her name right now, I could probably look it up. Female reporter who is investigating vampires, and this was, I believe, early 1990s or late 1980s. She was, looking for someone who claimed to be a vampire. She traveled around investigating the vampire culture and trying to find out if these beings actually exist. Now, she went on an interview with this vampire. Okay, actually, I found it right now. Her name was Susan Walsh, and it was in 1996. Now, you can find this as an actual case. This is completely documented. This actually really happened. And it was on July 16th, 1996, Susan Walsh of Nutley, New Jersey. Supposedly it says that she decided to disappear on her own after dropping off her son. Now, so she started working for this. She was assigned this to research the sex industry, which is a dangerous industry. And she's from New Jersey, like I said. Russian mobsters were allegedly forcing young immigrant women to work like slaves in strip clubs. James Ridgway described Susan as dogged in her work. So she was very dedicated to doing her research. So, that makes me think now maybe the Russian mobsters or someone in the sex industry had something to do with her disappearance. But let me keep reading. Okay, so she did the research of the sex industry, but she earned praise. She earned praise for a Russian mob article, but she also received serious threats when it was published. But that didn't stop her from taking another dark assignment, this time investigating vampire nightclubs. These clubs attracted kids who call themselves goths. They were known for their outrageous black outfits, but some took it further, even drinking real blood. Susan was attracted to the vampire world. She even started dating a man who claimed to be one of the undead. According to James Ridgway, Susan wrote a detailed article, but she seemed to lose her journalistic objectivity. Okay, so this is a quote from one of the people that knew her. She believed a lot of the things that these guys were telling her about how they were secret murders and so on and so forth in the vampire world. She would come and say to me, I met these two guys and they got this van and it's very scary. I don't know whether I should go in their van. So I said, hey, look, don't go in the van because they might not be vampires, To Susan's disappointment, the Village Voice never ran her vampire story. Okay, so as you see, a lot of this stuff is kept hidden under light. Now they're saying that her article was never published on the vampire story. I mean, this girl went into these vampire nightclubs. She did the dirty work to interview all these people. Who knows if they were crazy, not crazy, something else was going on. The story was never shed to light, and they kept it under wraps. Let me keep reading. She went back to dancing full time, so she went back to being a stripper. 48 hours after her best friend saw her, she disappeared. Okay, so they don't know exactly what happened to her because they can't find the body. They say that she probably OD'd with some people that she was doing, wrong things with. And that those people were scared of reporting this because they probably felt that they would be responsible. So they probably ended up burying her somewhere. But Detective John Rain of the Nutley, New Jersey Police Department said, this is what the police are saying, "I believe Susan Walsh is alive. For some unknown reason to me at this time, she opted to leave her family and home, which she has a perfect right to do." A number of people, including an old friend, Melissa Hines, told the police that they saw Susan after she disappeared, getting into a limousine. "I definitely think it was her. I'm positive that I saw Susan a month after she disappeared." Now, a lot of people, when they lose a friend, they think they see these people, and it happens. But that's not 100% what happens each time. And it could be possible that this, close friend of her actually did see her stepping into a limousine. And the police did say that they think that she did run off on her own and decided to disappear. Not because, not that she was dead. So those are two things that fall together. Now, a license plate number, this is detective speaking again. A license plate number that Melissa Hines, which is Susan's friend, provided to us, we did track down. We spoke to the owner and operator of that vehicle. He had been with a woman fitting the description of Susan. He did view photographs and felt he was pretty sure that it had been her. But again, we had no positive identification of Susan Walsh at that time. The letters are so small, so that's why I'm having some trouble reading everything. Melissa believes that if Susan is alive, she may be deliberately hiding out. Now, this is what her friend said. "Susan definitely felt that she was in danger. She was scared for her life, and I think she was also feared her son's life could be in danger too. Susan actually told me that she wasn't going to make it in the next year. She felt that she was going to be killed." Floyd Merchant is Susan's father. Her father says, "I believe there is a chance that the mob was after her. People in organized crime were concerned that Susan had information that would send them to jail. According to Susan, that was the case. Melissa Hines believes someone was following Susan." This is her friend. "I thought at first that it was just her imagination, but I've seen it with my own eyes. I would see cars follow her, both of us. People follow my car, she was in my car, so definitely somebody was stalking her." Now, this opens up many possibilities. Now, two different things two different targets she could have had on her back. She could have had the Russian mob, and any type of mob is dangerous to mess with, especially when you're publishing an article that goes against what they're doing. But what I find strange is, if they wanted her dead, then she would have been dead probably not right away, but I'd say before she finished her research with the whole vampire research investigation. She went missing a long time after she published this article, and after her investigation with vampires, the vampire culture, is what makes me believe that it was something she or some cult or some people she encountered on her vampire investigation. I just find it, when you step into the world of any type of occult culture, whether it's vampires or Satanists or something from the occult, it's dangerous because most of these people, are not completely sane. And, well, I'm not completely sane, but I'm not, you know what I'm saying. Like, these people have issues, and Many of them are either sociopaths or psychopaths or people who are deranged, or, you know, people that don't have an exact purpose in their lives, so they use these types of lifestyles to make purpose and to feel part of something and to feel power and important. Now, and better than the human race, to feel, that they're special. Now, what's dangerous is that she actually went to these underground nightclubs and encountered these people saying that they were vampires or that they've murdered people. And that's when you go into a dangerous area. And my belief is that when she started visiting these places and meeting all these people, she ended up landing a target on her back for something, for some reason. And what's even stranger is that her vampire story was never released. As if someone working in the department didn't want it to be released, or was threatened, perhaps. Maybe he was threatened and by these people that she was hanging around with or encountering, and didn't want all the secrets that they were telling her to be published, as well as what happened with the mob. The point is that that's another case that went unsolved, and that's vampire related. And the reason I'm doing this, like I said, is because there's a lot of things that I want to come to light about this subject, about vampires, and there's a lot of stigmas that I want to separate from actual facts, and also theories and legends that people, I think, who are into the whole vampire subject should be aware of. A lot of people, that actually research this subject think, well, in medieval times, it was just something that came out of superstition, and Dracula is fake. Yeah, Dracula is fake. I agree with that. He's just a made-up character. And, Vlad the Impaler wasn't a vampire. I agree with that also. Even though that new movie that came out was freaking awesome. I don't know if anyone has ever seen it, but that was an ADHD moment. Let me get back to what I was saying. So, like I was saying, my point is, I just want to shed things to light, and I will be investigating the vampire culture. Probably not going to go as deep as this poor girl Susan Walsh did, but I definitely will be heading into New Orleans and conducting interviews and finding out the truth about this particular subject. I'm not saying I believe vampires exist, supernatural vampires exist, but I am saying I don't know. I really don't know. And especially in a day and age that we live now, that so many things are kept under wraps, things about aliens are kept under wraps, things that happen, that things that are not even supernatural, that occur, like crimes, for instance, that are kept under wraps. And the whole vampire legend is something that hasn't been 100% proven fact. It hasn't been 100% proven false either. So, I'm the type of person that likes to investigate things on my own and make sure that something is fact or false. I gather information from different sources. I like to have my mind taste different types of facts, different theories, and then finally make my own projection and my own finalized, basically finalized belief on any subject, whether it's religion, God, or anything else. So, I will be conducting more research on this subject for those who are interested in the vampire genre. Topic, and I will be uploading more videos. Anything new that I find, anything interesting, any credible information, any strange cases that I see that are occurring that might be related to the vampire topic, I will be uploading. And I will be documenting my entire trip to New Orleans, and as well as interviews and all of the sort. So I guess I will be speaking to you guys soon, and I don't know how to end these things, so I'm just going to say later. All right.